Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Adrian Furnham. Hello, Adrian. How are you doing?
Very well.
Well, Adrian, on this show, I like to get to the point by hitting the ground running. So we're going to start by talking about your first piece titled The Relationship Between Cognitive Ability, Emotional Intelligence, and Creativity. And this is the question. Adrian, is cognitive ability related to emotional intelligence?
Well, that's a question that many have investigated, and the answer is yes, but the relationship is very small. It's relatively easy to measure cognitive ability, to measure intelligence. There are a large number of very reliable and valid tests. The measurement of emotional intelligence is less easy. There are a lot of tests, but there's some disagreement about how you measure it. And the same is true with creativity. It's very difficult to measure creativity, which is why there has not been such a big research effort in that regard. But the relationship between emotional intelligence and cognitive ability or cognitive intelligence is, as I said, very small. In other words, very bright people can be both high and low on emotional intelligence and vice versa.
All right, Adrian. I often ponder this question because usually I wonder if smart people are manipulating others. And this is why research keeps suggesting that they're pro-social. And whenever I'm interviewing an expert intelligence researcher, I often pose this question because I don't believe that smart people are naturally pro-social. I think it's a function of manipulation.
Well, I don't agree with you entirely. I don't think it's an issue called smart people. I think those people who are manipulative, we would call Machiavellians or indeed psychopaths. This is a personality trait, and that's associated with manipulating other people. Now, you get bright Machiavellians and not very bright Machiavellians. So I think there are those, we know this, who manipulate individuals for their own benefit. But I think that's not got much to do with intelligence. If you are, of course, an intelligent Machiavellian or an intelligent psychopath, it's quite likely that you will be more successful than a less intelligent one. But I don't think it's a matter of intelligence. I think it's a matter of a personality disorder called Machiavellianism or psychopathy.
Well, I'm happy that you refer to psychopathy. I'm interested in this topic. Psychopaths, Adrian, they tend to be impulsive and impertinent, but I am more fascinated by the nature of high-functioning psychopaths. So, for example, even during our normal day-to-day correspondence, an average psychopath may feel upset by the way in which someone reacted to him, but the high-functioning psychopath will manipulate the situation to get what he wants. So I'm interested in the relationship between high-functioning psychopathy and IQ. And as you do know, Adrian, many high-functioning psychopaths, they're in politics, academia, and business.
Yes. It's not high functioning is not a concept that is used much in psychiatry. Psychiatrists make a distinction between psychopaths who are vulnerable and those who are grandiose. Grandiose psychopaths are people who, or I beg your pardon, that's with narcissists. But with psychopaths, I think by high functioning, you mean individuals who do well in society. I think one of the problems that the psychiatrists have had to confront is the idea that you are a psychopath or you're not a psychopath. That is, there's some clear distinction between one or the other. And that concept has been rejected. So this is on a scale. So some people are extremely high on the scale and show all signs of psychopathy. They have very little guilt, they have very little shame, they manipulate people in all sorts of ways. And there are those who are quite high. Now, as you quite rightly say, there are people in all sorts of professions who do very well being psychopaths because as I've said a number of times, if you are intelligent and good looking and well educated, and a psychopath, then you can use these abilities, your intelligence and your looks and so forth, to manipulate people much more successfully. I certainly agree with you. There's a lot of people in public life, in business and various other places, who you could say were, I think, technically psychopaths.
Yeah, so for example, Adrian, on the point of psychopathy and the dark triad, some time ago I read an article in Frontiers. I didn't read it in its entirety, but the writer was making the point that childhood neglect is associated with malevolent creativity. And I'm saying this to indicate that some usually people often assume that characters were involved in high level criminal activities, that they're intelligent. But after reading that article and doing further research, I formed the opinion that such people are not necessarily intelligent. The issue is that children who suffer from neglect, what do they lack? They lack attention. And one way to acquire attention is to be a deviant. So as a consequence of their deviant behavior, they're engaging in high-level criminal activities that may require large networks, and as such, people assume that they're intelligent. But my own view is that it is a consequence of a dysfunctional childhood. What is your opinion?
People have looked into that issue about the consequences of dysfunctional childhood on all sorts of things. I have read the literature on psychopathy and sociopaths. There's a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. A sociopath is usually thought of as somebody who has a moral conscience, but simply breaks all the rules, whereas a psychopath doesn't have a moral conscience. What I know from this literature is that the background of both psychopaths and sociopaths are very varied. In other words, there isn't a clear pattern, there isn't any clear findings with regard to any disturbed childhood. There is an interesting literature on problems in childhood and creativity, such that people have found ways of expressing their unhappiness and their pain, perhaps through creative means. But the link between childhood abuse or childhood neglect and psychopathy or sociopathy is, in my view, not fully established.
And Dr. Furnham, what about gender differences in psychopathy?
It has been investigated. There are differences, and there are gender differences on nearly all the mental disorders. They're not big differences, but they are statistically significant differences. Most psychopaths are men. That there would be a large number of female psychopaths, of course, but there are differences. Why these occur is not clear. We know, as I said, women are more prone to depression and men are prone to psychopathy. There are differences, they're small differences, and we're not always clear how they arise. But you're quite right, more men are psychopaths than women.
And Dr. Furnham, there's another question that's bugging me at the moment. The issue of stalking. So recently the media, the media and certain journalists have been feeding us with stories of men stalking women, and there's a popular term called toxic masculinity. But on an anecdotal level, Professor, I recognize that, and as I said, it is anecdotal. I have not done the studies. As yet, I have not read any. But during the duration of a relationship, when the relationship ends, men usually go their own way. And we have a concept some refer to as baby mama drama, or the scorned wife. So although we're told that men stalk women and men are violent, and this is a reality, men are more violent than women, it is evident that women are more emotionally invested in relationships, and we do have evidence and many studies to support this assertion. And as such, when a relationship is terminated, even if women do not become violent, they are more likely to develop an inclination to to continue investing in the man and children. Have you seen studies on this? Because so far I just have anecdotes. But
I don't know the literature on stalking very well. I certainly know the literature on the evolutionary psychology literature on what men look for in a woman and what women look for in a man. And it's quite clear that there are differences between the two. The evolutionary psychologists say what attracts a man to a woman is their fecundity, their ability to make babies, that what we are as men, what we are evolutionarily designed to do is to propagate our genes, in other words, to make babies, and we'd make babies with multiple women. On the other hand, women, of course, have a different perspective. What they want is a man who's going to protect them and give them healthy genes. So they look for different characteristics in a man than a man looks for in a woman. Women want men who are bright because then they probably make some more money, people who are emotionally intelligent, who are caring. Those are characteristics which a woman would look for because of the way that the man will look after his or her children. So this is an evolutionary psychology perspective. Not everyone would agree with it. The argument would be that one of the reasons why relationships break down is that men and women are looking for different things in the relationship, and these different things come from our evolutionary background.
Exactly my point. But Professor, I would love to see a proper study on stalking, because based on what I have been surveying, it is evident that even if men are more violent stalkers, women certainly seem to be more obsessive with their past partners. But then again, this is just anecdotal evidence. But I would love to see real literature on the topic.
Yes, I don't know the stalking literature.
Neither do I.
It might well be the case. It sounds a reasonable hypothesis. We need to get some data to check.
Yes, because so far the consensus is that men are bad, they're stalking, and yes, they're violent. But again, because I'm young, you're an older person, I'm sure you can give me several studies of ex-wives who just wouldn't leave their husband. That's the reality. Scorned women don't go away, so they are more likely to stalk, even though they're less violent. It's just like physical abuse. In relationships, men hit with greater force, but women are more likely to hit with men.
It's positive. I don't know. This is not my area of expertise. I can't comment on it.
Yeah. But it's a touchy area, Adrian, and I would love for you to do a study, but you can't be cancelled again. You're like retired, right?
Yes.
Yes, I say you can't be cancelled again. But Adrian, there's this writer called Tom his name is Tom. I can't remember the last name now. And he has been writing some pieces on sexism and why women prefer men who are benevolently sexist. And he said that it is attributed to the parental investment theory. The assertion is that men who are benevolently sexist are more likely to invest in women and their offspring. This is true. And again, I say this to just indicate that I do have a problem with people who engage in negative discrimination. The truth, it sounds controversial, but the truth is that there is a place for some forms of sexism. So for example, if you are an elderly, if you're carrying a heavy load and you see an old man and you see an old woman and a young man, you're going to ask the young man for assistance, and more than likely he's going to say yes, because that's just the proper thing to do. Not every act that's deemed to be sexist is actually bad. From an evolutionary perspective, if men were not benevolently sexist, would we be here today?
Well, the evolutionary psychologists have very clear views on this, and they would be very strongly opposed by the feminists. The feminists, evolutionary psychologists say it's biology is destiny, and the feminists would disagree with that completely. Now, you can ask certain questions about what men do or what people prefer in situations and test those particular theories, whether there is more evidence for an evolutionary theory or more evidence for a feminist theory. And also, I think you'd have to take into consideration cultural differences, such that one culture might manifest a belief system or a set of behaviors rather different from another. this is very hot area, very hot territory to get involved with. And I don't have enough expertise to comment on this area.
Well, I know, Adrian, you're a distinguished professor, and I selected you because I like your articles and you're frank. That's why I'm asking you this question. But you're being very smart. You're playing very smart. But let's get back to your paper. What's the relationship between intelligence and creativity? Are intelligent people really more creative?
Types of creativity. I've divided them into scientific creativity, artistic creativity, and business creativity. And it certainly seems the case for scientific creativity, that is, like people who win Nobel Prizes, that there is an evidence for high IQ there. It seems that personality variables are more related to creativity in the arts, intelligence variables more related to creativity in the sciences, and motivational variables more related to creativity in business. But there have been some very important studies. In fact, I'm writing a chapter on this topic just as we speak, on intelligence and creativity. And people have searched the literature and done studies for nearly 100 years. And the answer is yes, there is a very small relationship, which means that people who are not particularly good at school or do very well on intelligence tests have been shown to be extremely creative. And equally, some very, very clever people, you and I went to school with very, very clever people and don't appear to be very creative. The relationship is small, and in certain areas more than others.
I'm happy that you use a personal example by telling us about clever people we went to school with. So recently I interviewed Zoltan X, and there was a running joke, Adrian, you did so well in school, so why aren't you famous? Yes, some people, Adrian, they were so bright in school, but if you Google John Brown, why can't I see his name if he was such a bright person?
Well, that's right. There's a very, very famous study done from the 1930s and the 1940s by a man called Terman. And he's followed people. So he got hold of, I can't remember what it was now, a large number, maybe 1,000, very, very, very bright students. They were nearly all men and they were Americans. And this is in the 1930s and 40s. And he traced them for 40 or 50 years. And they were called the Termanites because he was called Terman. And of course, that was his puzzling finding. So you would have these quite exceptional children who had been diagnosed and measured and assessed at school. And the assumption would be that they would have lives of spectacular success in business or in academia or whatever they chose. And some did. But the question was why quite a large number didn't. They had very average sort of lives and very average sort of jobs, which shows that, having these abilities at a very young age don't necessarily guarantee anything. What the psychologists say is that you need three things. You need ability, you need particular personality profile, and you need motivation. So although I might be highly able or very, very clever, unless I'm motivated to do something, that my abilities will be wasted. So it's this interesting combination of a set of personality variables, high intelligence, and this creativity talent. Put them together and you have a wonderful outcome. But if any of these are sort of missing, then you will have the strange phenomenon of very, very talented people who are not very creative, or equally, people who don't do very well at school and don't do very well on intelligence tests, show that they have remarkable creativity in certain areas.
Exactly. Remember, Adrian, genius is an interesting combination of unusual factors. So someone with an IQ of 120 to 130, that represents pure intelligence. But for him to be a genius, he needs a certain level of eccentricity. And many bright people are high in conscientiousness. So this could be explaining the results.
Yes, conscientiousness is not particularly linked to creativity in the arts or in business, or it is in business. First of all, when you give the IQ scores, in fact, to be considered a genius, you need to score 145. not 100, that's what's called 3 standard deviations above the norm. And there have been studies on giftedness. I recently read a book on this topic and written a paper on it. And there are journals, the Journal of Giftedness, where they look at gifted people. And there are a number of stereotypes associated with those who are gifted, that they're all very strange, they don't have very good social relationships, that they are quirky in all sorts of ways. And whilst a few gifted people are, the data suggests that this is more of a stereotype, that giftedness doesn't come along with any particular set of difficulties associated with it. It's quite fortunate that one can be gifted in a certain area, a gifted musician, a gifted athlete, a gifted academic, and in any other sense be quite normal.
Yes, and I do agree with some of that, with some of these findings, because if you're highly intelligent, you know how to understand social relationships. So more than likely, you're less inclined to be what we consider to be weird. But Adrian, I didn't read that chapter you wrote, so tell us a little about what's the name of the chapter you wrote on giftedness.
Oh, I haven't written it at the moment. It's a chapter for a book.
Oh.
So it's a book on intelligence. I beg your pardon, it's a book on creativity. And people are writing different chapters, and my chapter is on personality, intelligence, and creativity. And people have long been interested in the relationship between these three factors. The problem from the academic point of view is how you measure creativity. It's easy to measure intelligence, it's quite easy to measure personality, but it's more difficult to have a very good measure of creativity, and that makes the scientific endeavor more problematic in this area.
Of course, because remember, creativity is context dependent. The market responds to a product it deems to be creative. So for example, there's a phenomenon called the Galapagos effect. When you produce a product that's so complicated and people don't want it, yes, you are creative, but you are not going to receive accolades. So this is one of the reasons why measuring creativity is such a complicated task.
Yes, that's one of the reasons. Creativity is usually defined as the ability to make something or invent something that is both new, novel, and useful. And it's that second one that you pointed out, that it's all very well coming up with something which is extraordinary, interesting, and so forth. But if people don't understand it or don't want to buy it or so forth, it's not going to be very successful at all.
Let me give a perfect example, Adrian. Mark Zuckerberg is exceptionally smart, and so is Jack Dorsey. But Twitter and Facebook are not transformative innovations. And I have an article coming out on the topic. I have an article that will be published soon. People like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, they are reading the environment, and our present economy, I call it the attention economy. Therefore, if you're able to keep people attuned, you're going to make money. So because Zuckerberg and Dorsey are so brilliant, they created these social media platforms to ensure that people are always in a space to promote themselves, and they're rewarded. But Facebook and Twitter are not really good examples of creativity. We can live without Twitter.
Yeah. The creativity, the question, of course, is that many of these things you talk about are not the invention of one individual, they're the invention of groups of individuals. And that constitutes yet another problem. So you can talk about a famous and a creative painter, and you can say Van Gogh was a very creative artist. But when people work in business, although occasionally one person will come up with an idea and a product, nearly all the products that you've mentioned are the result of people working together, a group of individuals. And this makes the whole question, again, very problematic. So the team dynamic might be much more important than the level of intelligence of the individuals within that team. But that's an academic question again.
So Adrian, because you're an expert in psychology, HR, and so many different fields, please tell us, why do some departments scale? So for example, John Brown has a company, let's call it G, and Mary Lee's company is B, but John Brown HR department is superior, and as a result, his workers are more productive. Why are some companies just more efficient? based on your research in intelligence and psychology and HR?
It's a very big and difficult question. Why are some companies more productive than others? I think it's more than a psychological question. Obviously, the way they are structured, the way they, the individuals they have. You're breaking up a bit, Lipton. Can you
I'm
hear
not
me?
speaking. I can hear you well, but I am not
Are
speaking.
you there?
Yes, I'm not speaking.
Have you gone?
No, I'm still here. I'm still here.
I'm not sure you're receiving me at the moment.
No, I can hear you. I can hear you. I'm hearing you well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just thought, all right.
Yeah,
okay. It was the line seemed to be very bad.
You can go ahead.
Well, all right. I can't answer your question in the sense that we know, I've been interested in individual difference predictors of productivity. So in organizations, why are some individuals more productive than others? So the same person, people in the same job, we've known since 1922 that the most productive person group is something like four times as productive as the least productive group within a certain area. Imagine we can measure their performance. So if they're in sales or they're in marketing or something where you can measure their performance, the most productive people are considerably more productive, 2, 3, 4 times than the least productive. Then the question becomes, what are the characteristics of the more and less productive individuals? Now we know that. We know intelligence plays a part. We know that people who are able to moderate their they're good at emotional regulation. We know that hardworking, conscientious people are better. So we know of the personality and ability profile of those who are more versus less productive. But that doesn't mean that necessarily an organization is more or less productive. It's the way people are managed, it's the way the firm is structured, that there are many other factors. So you can have a group of very productive people, a very successful group in an organization which for one reason or another is not very productive. In other words, the organization is structured in such a way that their productivity is not that good. So it's got to do with psychological factors and organizational factors and sociological factors. And it's enormously complicated. And all I can comment on is the known literature on individual differences and productivity.
Well, Adrian, I believe that you have answered the question.
Good.
That's actually what I wanted to hear. The organizational structure is very important. Some years ago, I read a book by a writer called Jason Jennings, and he submits that the best organizations are not bureaucratic. So for example, the person in the HR department should have a skill set that reflects HR. And if the HR manager is better suited to accounting, maybe she should be in accounting. So the best organizations, they know how to identify talent. They are great curators of talent.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Getting the whole vocational psychology is dedicated precisely to that, to trying to get the right person in the right job, square pegs and square holes, round pegs and round holes, that a person's profile and talent fit well with the nature of the job that they have.
And Adrian, this is a personal question. So I have surveyed the literature on productivity in academia and also sex differences. And you're productive academic. I'm not going to be humble. You have done very well. Why are some academics just so productive, Adrian? They produce paper after paper, like yourself and Edward Dutton.
Well, I tell you what I think the answer to that is. It's the way in which you cope with rejection. If you write an academic paper in a top journal, the chances of it getting rejected are 9 out of 10, and in fact, even higher. So you will work very hard, you'll do studies, you'll write them up, and you'll submit them to an academic journal, and you get rejected. it's not good, it won't be published. It's happened to all of us many times. It's happened to me already this week. The question is how you cope with that rejection. What do you do when faced with that rejection? How well do you cope with this? This for me is, there is, the motivation, the hard work, but academics are more successful in my view if they are able to cope with being rejected by others, taking that rejection, looking at it, seeing what you can make of it. I've written a paper on this called Publish or Perish. And as I think for me, there are many keys, simply the desire to write a lot, the desire to be successful relates to productivity as well as abilities. But in the academic world, it's predominantly this coping with rejection that differentiates those who become very productive from those who are less productive.
And again, I like the answer. And Adrian, personally, I deal with rejection quite well, and for a simple reason. In the grand scheme of things, people are really meaningless. So today, someone may dislike your work, and within the next 10 years, when you're a celebrity, he wants to be your boss. That's just how people are. So if I submit an article and it's rejected, I edit it and submit it elsewhere. And then if I submit an email and the person says no, I move on. But because I'm so adept at persuading and convincing people, they usually say yes. Like you said yes. You didn't say yes originally, but I got you to say yes. So it's all about your worldview.
Indeed.
And some of us, our job is to interview productive academics. Like yourself. I'm not going to be modest. I think that this channel is the gold standard for academic commentary. Have you been listening to the interviews?
I will do, but I haven't as yet. I've been away, and I'm going away again. So, but thank you for interviewing me, and the best of luck to you.
Yes, but I'm not finished yet, though.
Oh, you haven't?
No, no, I'm not finished yet. So, Adrian, I am surveying the data, and I'm looking for a compelling reason to explicate the sex difference in productivity. Men seem to be more productive than women, not only in the intellectual world, but also in real estate and in other professions. Do we know why? I'm not seeing a clear answer.
Yeah, this is a very, very hot and difficult topic. And my experience tells me not to go there. I think the answer is, if you measure things like top scientists, top artists, top this, that, and the other, you're going to find a sex difference. There's no doubt about it. The question is why that sex difference occurs. Is it that society is so arranged that men have huge numbers of advantages? And if there was an equal playing field, for instance, then you will find that there would be equal contribution or productivity between the sexes. And I think there's arguments, strong arguments in that favor. For instance, if you noticed during the Soviet days and you went to the Soviet Union, the majority of dentists in the Soviet Union, I think I'm correct in this, and engineers were women. So you don't find that in the Western world. There were, a huge number of very, very competent scientists in the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union didn't differentiate between men and women when selecting people for these particular roles. So there are biological arguments and there are environmental arguments, and you can say, from observing what you see in women being not as successful or not as productive in some area or another, you can say, oh, well, that's explicable in terms of biology. On the other hand, people would say, well, you haven't understood how people become productive. So I think the answer is it's a very complicated answer, and it's a very politically hot answer. I think the answer is both, that there are known biological differences between men and women, but there are also societies differentiate in how they treat men and women. And the consequence of the two leads to the observations that we make.
My response, point number one, you are not you're not swallowing the bait. I like your response here. Yes, you're not saying anything too outrageous, and you can't afford that. But I'm happy that you refer to the Soviet Union, because even today in the developing world, women tend to do well in STEM. And the argument is that if you're a poor woman in a developing country, you're motivated to succeed in STEM because they will need the money. Whereas wealthier women in affluent countries are less likely to study STEM because they have the luxury of different choices. And I think that this argument is compelling. The sex gap in STEM seems to be a big problem in rich countries. It's not such a great problem in Africa or even some countries in Asia.
I think you must be right. I'm not familiar with the details in this area, but I'm sure you're right.
And another issue again, Adrian, is self-efficacy. There's a new paper saying that men are higher in self-efficacy than women, and men also cope better with rejection. And STEM is a difficult profession, and as such, people who are not doing as well, even if they're very brilliant, they may exit the profession. So I've been observing since 2015 that women are more likely to exit STEM, and it's not necessarily because they're not as smart. Maybe it's a result of self-efficacy. When men fail, they stay in STEM. When women fail, they leave. If a woman gets 95 in geography but 100 in physics, she's going to study physics. And this is what studies have shown. The relative advantages are important for women. So maybe it's not really about sexism.
Yes, I've done work on people's perception of their intelligence and their actual intelligence. So I show them a normal distribution. And I say, well, what do you think you would score? Tell me how bright you think you are. And you have to give a number, 110, 120, whatever. And then I give them an intelligence test, maybe 2 intelligence tests. So what I know is I know how bright they think they are and how bright they actually are, at least given by the test. So you can look at the disparity, and some people are quite accurate, that they know how bright they are, they know they're very bright, or they know they're not very bright. But what I have found, and it relates to what you've been saying, is a very clear sex difference. And that is that men tend to overestimate their intelligence, and women tend to underestimate their intelligence. Now, it could be that, men have been encouraged all their lives by their parents for overestimation, for self-efficacy, and for women, it's the other way around. The problem with this is that it has consequences. So it was Henry Ford who said, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are right. In other words, your beliefs about your abilities are self-fulfilling. If you don't believe you're very good, you act as if you're not very good, and you don't become very good. So that, I think, is a very important issue, and it's something that you put your finger on here, the self-belief. So you will find male and female students in STEM subjects, and it might be that women or females have got identical scores to males, but because of their self-beliefs or their self-efficacy scores, they don't achieve as much. It's a very interesting and important issue that people are trying to address, particularly with talented women who score very highly, and almost giving them permission to use their abilities to become productive. I've seen a few recent papers in this area. It's very interesting.
Yes, so there's a paper that was published about 5 or 6 years ago saying that women are less likely to major in a discipline when it is believed that success in that era is dependent on genius. For men, the effects are non-existent. Even if we assume that the average physicist is a genius, that will not preclude men from getting a PhD in physics. So I think self-efficacy is an underestimated variable,
that's right.
Especially in business. They say fake it until you make it. CEOs are hyper-confident people. Some years ago, the Atlantic magazine published an article titled "The Confidence Gap," arguing that women like to be 100% ready. Men, they don't need to be 100% ready. And Adrian, this is one of the reasons why I'm more likely to interview men than women. So I send an email to a woman and she finds an excuse to not show up. She says, I'm not an expert. The men, they just say yes. The men just say yes, and they show up. And this negatively affects women, because when you show up on to an interview, you get an opportunity to boost your status, and in the near future you can get a book deal or even more money. So when women say no when they are very good, they're doing themselves a disservice. But I don't know how we can combat this. I don't have an answer.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah, and there are a lot of brilliant women, and I would love to interview them, Adrian, but I can't get them to say yes. Like, I really can't get them to say yes. But there's a paper that was published some years ago, Adrian, titled Gender Differences in Scientific Productivity and a Persistent Phenomenon. And I'm just going to give a brief summary. The right, Bergen, these names sound European, so I won't bother to pronounce them. Yeah, the thesis in this paper is that the gender gap is less persistent in younger circles.
You've gone. I don't know what's gone wrong.
Okay, so let me repeat myself, not a problem. I'll repeat myself. So there's a paper titled Gender Differences in Scientific Productivity, a Persistent Phenomenon. And the thesis is that the gender productivity gap is less persistent in younger circles. That's the thesis of the paper, and it confirms earlier research saying that younger women, they do just as well as young men. And a factor for this is that they don't have children. When women marry and have children, they tend to become employed in jobs requiring greater flexibility. What's your take on this issue?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
The motherhood penalty. But Adrian, it's interesting that fatherhood pays and motherhood is seen as a financial penalty for women. But I think we know why. Melanie Phillips, she said, women should work, but work is crucial to a man's identity.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Yeah, yeah, partially evolutionarily and partly social. Let's be realistic, Adrian. A man doesn't work. A woman doesn't work. Women who don't work, they socialize children. Studies are producing that children tend to do better when their mothers stay home. But if a man doesn't work, what is he? A bum. people and again, I said it's partially environmental and social. The cost of not working are greater for men than women. So women who don't work, they don't experience much of a blowback. So there's always a trade-off. So on one hand, it is said, oh, there's a gender pay gap or a gender gap in STEM. But on the other hand, women who decide to earn less money or who are just interested in spending more time with their families, they're not penalized. So maybe I'm giving you an assignment. Maybe this is something that you should study. Is the gender pay gap a consequence of, how should I phrase this now? Rational cost-benefit analysis or responding to societal perceptions then? I'm trying to phrase the study that you're going to do when you get some time.
Something's gone wrong again.
Yeah, so
recording.
Yes, it happened.
There's something, this recording keeps going on and off. I think we're going to have to stop there. I will.
Yeah, so what did you say? Yeah, yes, yesterday I was doing an interview and
I'll end off with the answer to this.
Yeah, you can answer. Go ahead and answer.
Okay, let me finish. I'm going to stop now. This will be my final answer. The answer is yes. I think you talk about women work. Of course, there's paid work and there's unpaid work. And I think, most societies, not all societies, but most societies have it that the man is the breadwinner and goes out to work in the traditional model. And the men have more difficulty stopping work than women because they have been so involved in it. They've been the whole identity has been caught up in their work. I was talking just yesterday to somebody who's thinking of retiring, and men find this quite frightening, despite the fact they have plenty of money, because it's not, their work is very important to who they are. Now, women when they're doing paid work, then they will have exactly the same experiences. But often women work, they do a massive amount of unpaid work, which is not considered to be work. And that makes the issues much more complicated. This is an area I have not researched, except identity and job status. And it's a very complicated one. And like your other questions, quite a sensitive one.
Yes.
So I'm going to duck out of that.
All right. But yes, Adrian, it was a pleasure to speak to you. But yesterday,
okay, well,
yeah, yesterday the same thing happened. So I have to end early, unfortunately. We have to wrap up because of the internet.
Okay,
issue.
well,
all right then.
Best of luck. I'll look at your channel.
Yeah, man. Bye.
Thanks, Lipton.
Yeah.
Bye.